The harsh reality is that these numbers are people. HIV/AIDS has the face of a woman. What is needed now is for us to stop HIV new infections. We need to prevent. And this is the message I want to put across. The question I want to ask is prevention failing in Africa? This is an important question for me because earlier on I mentioned that for every 5 people that we put on treatment, 2 get newly infected. We should be moving towards a situation where the new infections should be going down, but instead we still see very high rates of new infections, and this is a concern. Again, just to show you the gap, that green, that is Africa, and then the other stripes are the other regions. And the point I want to raise on that earlier slide is that if you make a difference in Africa, are you going to make a global difference? And the answer for me is yes, because this is where the disease is. But when you look at the amount of money spent on health, on HIV/AIDS in comparison, you would have to turn this graph the other way around for it to make sense. The other reason I'm also saying that I'm asking if prevention is failing is that in 2007, look at these countries. Look at we are talking about knowledge on how to prevent sexual transmission and reject misconceptions. Namibia, which is at the top of that list, is 62% of the population. We have countries, as you go down the list, 40% of the population. It means you have more than 60% of a population who do not know how to protect themselves. And again, this was a sobering thing for us. And look at the age group, the 15 to 24. This is an issue of concern. And when you go further into this analysis, it actually shows that 60% of this study group were women, were young girls between the age of 15 and 24 who did not know how to protect themselves from HIV/AIDS. Condoms used at last risk sex. Again, you see very low condom use across all the countries. And this was in an effort to try to understand why we continue to have the new infections. Again, it's still acceptably quite low. Currently, we have 1 female condom per 200 women. Are we serious? No. Testing, how many people know if they are living with HIV/AIDS? Very, very low. Countries like Zimbabwe, 6.6, Lesotho, 5.5, and the highest is 36%. So again, if you don't know your status, how do you access treatment? How do you then prevent yourself from proceeding to having AIDS? Now, I then tried to answer why I think prevention seems to be failing in Africa. And I talk about the mistakes on how prevention has been approached in the past. Behavior change programs, which we have talked about a lot, which we have worked on a lot, but mostly targeting individuals. And the problem with that is that an individual behavior change is likely to be short-term. There's no guarantee that if you convince me to use condom with this partner, next partner I'm going to use condoms. That's the problem. There's no guarantee that if I have a supportive partner now, I will have another supportive partner in a few years' time. So unless you address community behavior change, you are going a very short distance, and after a while you're back where you started from. The other point is, what are the messages? We all know we talk about ABC. Abstinence, be faithful, condomize. Very popular message, but when we ask the young people in Africa, what does being faithful mean? They couldn't define it because there is no African term which says faithful, which means there's no word that a local language word you could take to describe faithfulness. And so young people struggled with that terminology. And what the message that was sending to us is when we are designing messages, we need to think about messages that have worked in other parts of the world may not necessarily work in the African context. We looked at the issue of women's rights versus the rights of women in a community. And again, we have done a lot of work in trying to empower women, in trying to achieve gender equality. But the question we ask is, so why does HIV/AIDS still have the face of a woman? And what that tells us is that, again, we missed the boat somewhere. We missed the boat by assuming that if you empower a woman, she will then go home and demand a condom. She will go home and refuse to have sex when the husband wants it, even if he is clearly infected. We also made the assumption that women in risky environments and situations will have the power to stand up and say, I'm leaving. It doesn't happen. It's not happening. Women are staying in risky relationships. Women are still having high-risk sexual encounters, not by choice, but because the culture is such that the person who decides about when sex should happen, how it should happen, is still the man. So we have a number of women who feel frustrated with the empowerment programs because when they went into application, they don't seem to work. Some of the women eventually are then beaten by husbands when they try to insist. And we have lots of stories of women who find themselves in really a quagmire situation. They now know that I should not have unprotected sex. They can't force this man to use a condom. They refuse to have sex with the man, and after a while, the man finds a girlfriend. And when he has a girlfriend, he doesn't stop wanting to have sex with her. He still wants to now have sex now openly. What does that woman do? The systems of empowerment don't go beyond that. They give you empowerment, then they send you home and wish you good luck and hope that you'll survive. So we are now questioning some of these approaches and methodologies. And we are saying, if we are going to do women empowerment, let's do it in the context of a community. Let's empower women. Let's make the men understand why we are empowering women. And let's do combination empowerment programs and not singular empowerment programs. Another area is the issue of linking between HIV/AIDS, gender, and culture, which we believe are still misunderstood, grossly, in fact. And in the last few years, we are strongly, strongly moving towards really trying to understand cultures. We are beginning to say the reason we have not achieved so much in Southern Africa is because we have ignored culture for too long. We have ignored the traditional leadership and structures in the fight against HIV/AIDS. These are important structures. And when we were thinking about that, I started from really the level of myself, an educated woman, economically empowered, well-traveled, everything, gender empowered. But when I looked at myself and my personal life, I still found that I struggled. When I go back right into my rural home and I try to implement some of the things I've learned, I don't succeed. And I even come out even more frustrated because when you now know and you can't bring the change, it's even more frustrating. And I started looking at why is it that I cannot break through some of these cultures? Why is it that even my understanding and my knowledge can't change this? When I go home, in the end, I get home, I sit there, my uncle sits there, he has never gone to school. He cannot define the term gender. But he will tell me to keep quiet. And in fact, he starts by saying, we know you and your gender programs, so don't bring them here. Here we are now talking family things, we are talking traditional things. If you don't buy into those principles, please leave. And it becomes a huge challenge. And I think that's why, no matter how much we teach about prevention, when we go into our bedrooms, when we go into our communities, it just doesn't work. We need to try to understand how to break that. And that's what you'll hear, I think, as when Veronica makes the presentation, some of the attempts we have done to try to penetrate the cultures, to try to break that. We can change this. We can turn the tide. First of all, by keeping the promises we make at all levels. At community level, at regional level, at international level. Let's just keep to the promises, because if we do that, we will be able to turn the tide.